This is the eLearn podcast. If you're passionate about the future of learning, you're in the right place. The expert guests on this show provide insights into the latest strategies, practices, and technologies for creating killer online learning outcomes. My name's Ladek, and I'm your host from OpenLMS. The eLearn podcast is sponsored by eLearn Magazine, your go-to resource for all things online learning. Click-by-click how-to articles, the latest in edtech, spotlight on successful outcomes and trends in the marketplace. Subscribe today and never miss a post at elearnmagazine.com. And OpenLMS, a company leveraging open source software to deliver effective, customized, and engaging learning experiences for schools, universities, companies, and governments around the world since 2005. Learn more at openlms.net. Hello, everyone. My name's Ladek, and my guest for today is Chad Udell, the Chief Strategy Officer and co-founder of Float and SparkLearn. Chad is also a well-documented forward thinker in learning with books like Learning Everywhere, How Mobile Content Strategies Are Transforming Training, and his newest book, Shock of the New, which he co-authored with Gary Woodil. In this strategic conversation, Chad and I talk about understanding the why behind learning ecosystems and how to create a plan by rethinking your organization's overall rationale around what you want to accomplish with learning. We also talk about what the best place is for learning in an organization. Is it the company or school learning management system? Is it an ad hoc set of tools, or is it someplace else? And we also dive into how your organization can best support learners in finding information. We then talk about how much time learners actually need, especially when thinking of learning as a journey in today's remote and hybrid reality. We dive into the importance of leadership, management, and values around creating a learning culture where learning is actually celebrated. We then kind of have a fun time because we talk about what predictions have come true from Chad's book, Learning Everywhere, and what consequences he believed this reality continues to have for today's workplace. We then talk about SparkLearn as a new platform. It's a new interactive platform where content can be created and organized easily as an answer to the question, why do most mobile learning apps fail? And hint, it's the failure of being able to search for the content that you need. We round out our conversation by talking about the main issues and concerns Chad sees with his clients around the safety of data and information. Now, remember, we record this podcast live so that we can interact with you, our listeners, in real time. So if you'd like to join the fun every week on LinkedIn or Facebook or YouTube, just come over to elearnmagazine.com and subscribe. Now, I give you Chad Udell. Hello, everyone. This is Ladek coming to you from OpenLMS. I'm excited today to have Chad Udell on with me here from SparkLearn. Or is it Float, or is it, I don't know, you're an innovator who has many titles.
Yeah, it's both SparkLearn and Float. Float is the bespoke application company. We build platforms and tools for enterprise, and then SparkLearn is a productized version of some of the best services that we offer, packaged up in a nice learning experience platform.
Fantastic. So I have to comment on this because I noticed it while we were in the green room before the show, but so many of us play the guitar.
You know, I mostly just stare at them. You know, I kind of play them, but mostly stare at them.
You know, that's exactly. But that's my answer too. Like, I don't know, as anybody who's listened before, like I actually have a rock and roll band down here in Mexico. But you know, we play once a month, but it's like mostly we just get to stare at it. I don't know, whatever.
Yeah. I'll look away at it when a meeting goes especially boring. I might grab one and kind of. But no, it's a good release, and all the rest of the music toys are fun as well too. So
really cool. So where do we find you in the world today? Like you're sitting in your home, but where?
I am in my home. I live in central Illinois, in a small town called Metamora. It's just by Peoria, Illinois. Basically, if you took Chicago and St. Louis, drew a string in between the two of them, we'd be right basically in the middle.
Fantastic, super cool. So. You know, I reached out to you because you were talking about learning ecosystems, learning platforms, that, you know, sort of what that universe is looking like today and how it's evolving. And you spoke at DevLearn recently. I think it was only 2 weeks ago, right? Is that correct?
It was just a couple of weeks ago out in Las Vegas at the Mirage. The Guild put that on, and good event. It was like 3,000 plus people there.
So yeah, I would have loved to have come. I was at EDUCAUSE at the exact same time in Colorado. So that as well had thousands and thousands of people. I think it was like 3,000 or 4,000 people. So.
Conferences are back.
Yeah, exciting. So then tee us up. So put it on the table. What is it that your presentation was about in terms of learning ecosystems? What is it when I think learning ecosystem? How broad is that? How far does it go? And then we can go down that rabbit hole together.
Yeah. So the session that I presented, it was called "Creating a Plan for Your Next Gen Learning Ecosystem," and really we start at the top really of the funnel, and that is rethinking your organization's overall rationale for creating and putting learning technology into your audience's hands, right? So understanding the why helps you in terms of understanding basically the what, like what it is that you're going to be creating, what you're going to be publishing, and what you're going to be enabling your audiences and your learners to do. So a lot of the materials in the talk are actually based off of a great book that was written by Dr. Seychatz and Dr. J.J. Walcott, both former ADL folks. The name of the book is Modernizing Learning. And in that book, they outline a great plan, if you will, a structural overall kind of approach to looking at learning for your organization. Really, it's about the foundations of learning. Really, like, are you assessment driven? Are you knowledge based? Really, are you trying to get something into your learners' heads, or are you really looking to, in a more modern approach, something that's more about engagements? Making sure that they know where to gain skills and knowledge if and when they need to. So it's more on demand, so it's like this difference between the schoolhouse model versus I need to ask Google.
The Google model, yeah.
Right. Yeah, type of thing like that. And then all the way on down through, of course, technology becomes part of it, right? So it's like the learning management system versus some more kind of heterogeneous approach to standing up as something where it's like less a monolithic system and more highly componentized. I liken it more to like the Swiss Army knife versus, say, for example, a tray of surgeon's tools. Each one of them has a very specific function, does it very well, but it doesn't do like a whole lot. They stay in their lanes, and then also, just trying to say, basically, wrap it all in a friendly bow to make sure that it's all very user friendly. Is it accessible? Is it engaging? Is it inclusive? Does it offer me a flexible method to access it, or do I have to go back to like some training workshop room in order to access the system? Believe it or not, there are plenty of archaic old systems out there and companies that haven't really modernized their training infrastructure for quite some time. It's about time, because obviously with new emerging standards and new expectations that learners have about how they can perform their jobs, we owe it to them to provide them tools that are, always available, inclusive, easy to use, consumer grade user interfaces, and basically their best friend, but in a little app form.
Hi, I'm jumping into the conversation real quick to ask you a very simple, quick favor. If you are enjoying what you're listening to right now, if it's interesting, if it's entertaining, if you're pulling away value, if you're learning something, whatever the case may be, do me a favor and just hit subscribe on your podcast player right now. If it's on your phone, if you're listening on a computer, whatever it is, just take 2 seconds right now, hit subscribe. It helps us. You'll never miss an episode, and everybody wins. And if you really like this content, a lot, come on over to eLearn Magazine, throw your email address in there and subscribe there as well for other great content around our blog posts, around the events we play, and of course, this podcast as well. Thank you very much. And now back to the show. That's a lot of meat to put on the table, which is fantastic. I love it. One of the things that was just kind of kept resonating in my mind as you were kind of explaining there, I went back to the word "it," right? Like we tend to see still within organizations, and definitely in higher education, where is the place that I'm going to be doing learning? Talk to me about that. And that's kind of where I was like, so when I think ecosystem, I think of what you described, right? Where there might be an app over here for this, or there might be, hey, we have a knowledge base over here that I access. So how much of it is it versus
the everything?
The everything. Yeah. Like, because I want to take that to where like how the learning manager's job is evolving.
That's a fantastic question, because we can be well, somewhat egotistical, I guess. Maybe that's not the right word, but definitely centric. Like very parochial in our view that like all learning must take place in the learning management system or in the tools that we provide them. Otherwise, it ain't learning. But I think we would certainly argue, or our employees would argue that maybe the best place for their knowledge is the subject matter expert Bob that sits in the cubicle right next to him or is available in Slack at all times, right? So, learning can take place in a lot of different spaces, right? You've got your company's wikis and Confluence sites and documentation and knowledge base. You've got repositories of sales training videos and things of that nature. Maybe you've got a subscription to Skillsoft or LinkedIn Learning. You've got, all kinds of different tools and systems that are out there these days. So to think that people only learn in the LMS or only learn in the specific tool or platform that you have provided to them is just, it's a little bit short-sighted, right? So,
What about time to learn? I know that we've talked about this quite a bit on this show, but I'd love to hear your opinion, especially as somebody who's thought about this and you've written about it as well. Things are really accelerating and evolving and being reconstructed coming out of the pandemic. We can still kind of say that.
Yeah.
Do I, as an employee, still look for structured time? Like, hey, I'm going to take, Thursday afternoons, and that's when I'm doing my skill building, or, I know that so I guess, again, it's no longer it's like, are you still seeing, with your clients, hey, we do want to have structured time, but then there's also this idea that we want to be able to access, immediate answers for the problems that we have on the day-to-day job kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple things I think that kind of come to mind when you bring it up that way. That last statement there, when you're on the job, right? Very well known, very well regarded model that Bob Mosher and Con Gottfredson came up with, the 5 moments of need, right? Like when you want to learn something for the first time, when you need to apply it, when something goes wrong, when you need to learn more, and so on and so forth. I think I named 4 out of the 5 there.
Kudos. I couldn't even have done that.
I would have gotten a B on the test, but that's a model that I think accepts the fact that learning is a continuum. It's a journey. It's not a singular event. The best organizations obviously are allotting time for their employees to have some professional development, but just simply giving them the time doesn't necessarily obviously make it so. People are going to fill their time with all kinds of different things, everything from posting GIFs in their Microsoft Teams installation to something that might be even less productive than that. I'm not really quite sure what that might be off the top of my head, but unless you provide them the tools, the platforms, and maybe the rationale or the motivation, it's not going to necessarily happen. So learning as an event, learning as a specific time or a thing, if you will, is obviously vital and important for the red ocean, the red view of training, which is compliance and the cover your butts type of thing in order to prevent you from getting sued or making sure that your government compliance checks are all in order. But when we talk about making our employees better people, better teammates, better humans, we want to provide a healthy dose of all kinds of training and all kinds of content, not just even about necessarily your business and your history and all of the other stuff that's kind of boring, but also like leading with empathy, managing in times of conflict, making sure that wellness is part of your day-to-day, diversity, equity, and inclusion, all the other types of newer soft skills that I think are starting to get some much deserved attention, especially now that we're spread out. A lot of people are working remotely and hybrid, and probably, at least in some measures, permanently. I think post-COVID, I think the thought of getting everybody to get back into the office, while it's very attractive to commercial real estate salespeople, is probably less attractive to the average person that has to do the 9 to 5, or in the case now of work-life balance and working all the time, it's like the 9 to 9, type of thing like that, right? So providing that those types of tools and venues as part of the ecosystem is important. And that's, that happens in all kinds of different ways. It can happen in your employee chat channels. It can happen in your knowledge-based tools. It can happen in your learning experience platforms. And in a well-structured learning management system, it can happen there as well. It's just, oftentimes those are kind of ill-regarded by the teammates, the employees. Like, they're not going to go there for their fun time learning.
Yeah, sure. Well,
Yeah.
how does this evolve? What a learning manager, a director of learning, a chief learning officer, the personality, the expectations, the level of importance and value in the organization. How is that all evolving in your mind? Especially, and then kind of sub part to that is, where does this break down in terms of the size of an organization? Like, I'm thinking, what you've just continued to describe sounds great until you get to like 100 employees, maybe.
Yeah.
And then suddenly I'm like, wow, I can see how agility becomes a factor there. So maybe let me throw those two questions at you.
I love it. I mean, so the crawl here, the lower third, says the personality of the chief learning officer. I was going to say, as you were kind of framing that up, it's especially in a smaller, medium-sized business, they're kind of the tastemaker. They're the person that gets to determine like what's on the menu. They're the curator of this menagerie of learning objects and content and vehicles and venues and tools and everything else. So they get an opportunity to set that stage, but it should be grounded, I would imagine, in company culture, values, what it is that they're trying to get across from an overall organizational structure, right? So, that aspect of the CLO, the chief people officer, is really vital, especially in the creation of some of these self-regulated learning environments where it's not as curriculum driven. You're essentially just trying to create a very nice, healthy assortments of learning tools and so on and so forth. I have teenage kids, and so I can go to the grocery store and I can buy a whole bunch of good, healthy foods and snacks and stuff like that. But there's also going to be some junk food there too, because kids want to eat some cookies or whatever else. I mean, I want to eat some cookies.
I was just going to say, bro, it's for me.
We all want to eat cookies.
It's for me.
But you'd like to think that people are going to make balanced choices, right? It's going to hopefully all weigh out in the end of it. But you have to kind of, again, curate and create that garden that they can pluck from, and it should be, obviously, I would imagine, grounded in your company's values.
Does that tastemaker role change if I'm thinking of an organization that's achieved 500, 1,000 employees? Because in my mind, I'm thinking maybe this is where, okay, strategically we're going in this business direction. So it's less about tastemaking, it's more about, I need these skill sets to show up in order for us to be successful. And is that shaping the experience? Is it more of a role? Does the role then transform more into, who am I bringing into the team to be able to shape the experience? Or, how does that grow?
Oh, sure. I mean, it's likely, especially when you start to talk about a scale that you're getting at, Ladek, it's not a single person, right? The training department of one, it goes by the wayside. But so you'd have a chief people officer or something like that, and then underneath them, they're going to have areas of discipline. Maybe you got somebody that's a director of skills. You got somebody else that's like, interpersonal and company culture, and all of those are going to be kind of like a vital input to make sure that you're hitting those targets, right? You want to develop your talent because you want to obviously make the billet complete, right? That your employees are able to and competent to do the work. But you also want to obviously create a company culture that encourages people to stay. And you don't do that through compliance and skill-based training, unless you're, I don't know, compliance and skill organization. I guess
a security organization.
People really love that stuff. But yeah, so if you're an InfoSec business, you might be able to get by with some of those types of things. But by and large, people want a satisfying job experience, and they want to be able to grow their skills. They want to be able to, continue that journey and learn some things. So at that point, you have to, I think, provide better food for your employees.
Take me to some of the challenges that you've experienced when working with clients? As you've put on the table, I think it's in your bio somewhere there that you help create learning experiences, right, for your clients. This is what you do. You recently wrote a book, Learning Everywhere. I think the subtitle there is How Mobile Content Strategies Are Transforming Training.
Yes.
And you also you did Shock of the New. That was just released as well.
Yeah. So Learning Everywhere, I've prepped, so I've got to be copied. And there is a third book. It's called Mastering Mobile Learning. That was the one in the middle. Just like the middle child always gets ignored or whatever, I guess. But the middle book. But this is the first one. This was in 2012. So it's a little bit, it's getting on in its years. 10 years old, but kind of at the advent of the iPad and the mobile learning kind of revolution, if you will. And then this one, the Shock of the New, is more about evaluating tools and technologies for your learning. So it's like it could be used as a buyer's guide. Like if I think I'm going to be purchasing myself some new mobile apps or some augmented reality, or do I need blockchain for my learning experiences at my business? That would be a good thing to potentially use or look at. But it's always been about our work at Float and at SparkLearn has always been about providing a vehicle or a venue for learning to take place within, right? And then the organization kind of brings their stuff, fills it up with the good, and we continue to make better, if you will.
Right. So you described it, I felt very well, that Float is the bespoke creator, and then SparkLearn was an amalgamation, or it is, it's a articulation of some of the best of, or is it maybe commonalities that you've seen across a bunch of clients? And if that's the case, if I've characterized that correctly, what have those discoveries been? Like, oh, every client needs this, this is the kind of learning pathways we create. This is the kind of experience they want. What does that look like?
Yeah. So we look at, in a lot of ways, Float has always been like a lab, a research oriented organization that takes some hypothesis about how people may learn effectively and then creates some design tools and patterns around those. Like some of our earliest experiments were like a simultaneous browsing experience where you browse as a leader or a teacher, and then the people in your classroom get a chance to see the same materials that you have, and then you can, and this in many ways that kind of predated like Zoom and some of the other things. I mean, Adobe Connect was like a deal at the time, but that was like pretty rare. And then Wayfiler, that was a tool where we had tied files to specific locations in space. So geolocation, Dropbox for like a generator set, it's like, here's the manual, here's the maintenance records. And all of those had some nice navigation toolkits and ways of accessing information, robust search, and so on and so forth. So you start to kind of take this and a little bit of that and plunk it in and go, well, what was unique about this? What was cool about this? What was useful? What was some of the feedback and the engagement patterns that we saw? Well, let's take that and pull it into an overall platform and then build, think of those design patterns as recipe components, it's like, and then assemble that into a nice 4-course meal, right? So it really has always been about taking the best of this or the best of that, whatever we learned with an individual customer or client at that time, and going, that's important. Let's put that on the shelf. And then when we came by time to like pull that out, it's like, oh, this is a pretty good compendium of stuff, right? So we need to have an app that's always available, that's easily accessible, that's scalable, that's highly searchable, that is open and takes content from all different kinds of sources, because people have PDFs and doc files and the drill, like everything, right? It's varied, video servers galore, right? And then furthermore, is it really about tracking assessments and scores, or is it more about tracking engagements and reuse and reaction and feedback, and continually testing the water to make sure that people like what it is that they're getting, and that's how you get people to come back. Is the reason I go back to the websites that I go to is not because I'm filling my brain up with their knowledge, but because I get a specific itch scratched, and I like to use that particular thing. I mean, the thing that makes Netflix, the phrase that we hear a lot, like, it's the Netflix of learning.
Right.
The thing that makes Netflix is not the easily scrollable, bands of films and movies that are in specific genre tiers or whatever. It's the content and the ease of moving from one piece of content to the next very, very seamlessly. And when we talk about that from a learning perspective, everybody wants to create the Netflix of learning. Well, you're not going to create the Netflix of learning because there's only one Netflix, and that wasn't made for learning. It was made for, watching reruns of The Office and, whatever else. I mean, so that's what brings people into that platform. So if you want to emulate the Netflix experience in your learning, you have to make the content easily consumable and bingeable. And reusable and engaging enough that people want to come back into it. You're not going to do that through compliance training. You're not going to do that through any type of thing other than the fact that you scratch that itch that the people have. And furthermore, you have to be able to assess whether you're scratching that itch, because a lot of times we as training people just create the content, throw it in a bucket, expect people to come get to it, and then we never really look at it ever again, other than the fact that, does everybody have a green check mark behind their name?
Again, you just put like 10 things on the table to talk about. I want to go back to something where you were saying, how many different learning content types, are usually thrown into a system. As you said, PDFs, docs, video clips, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Have you found, or are you working on, or do you have a strategy for just organizing that universe of craziness, right? Because we all have been there where it's like, oh, you know what? I'm creating this great course and it's going to be, slick. Here's the couple of things they need to read. Here's a few videos, but then, that gets multiplied out a couple of times. And then if you think of any typical university, it's just chaos.
Absolutely.
And we lose 90% of the knowledge in a server somewhere, and it's never going to get accessed again because is there any strategy to figure this out?
I mean, tags, taxonomy, good content curation types of skills and strategy around that, certainly from a human end, is very important. But also using smart search indexing tools is also really, really important. So, in our SparkLearn instance, we use an open Apache project called Solr, SOLR, to really crawl through all the materials that are in that server, in those servers, in order to create sound and good relevancy skills. And then we compare those relevancy results against tags and taxonomies that the curators have determined are valuable for that organization. So there is a human element. You're setting up the kind of the stage, you're putting all the pieces on the chessboard and say, these are the things that matter to us. And then you're taking all of the repository or the content of the information and saying, of these pieces of content, what elements in them have the pieces, the DNA, the components that matter to us. So compare the library of materials, whether it's already created or things that we're going to be creating, against the kind of the level set that we've determined is important to us. And I believe that right now is not, you just said it, under the weight of organizations, it's impossible to assess the value of all of that content. One of our customers has like 29,000 plus articles inside of a system, which sounds like a lot, and it's not a small amount, but then you compare it to something like the National Archives or Library of Congress, and you're talking about millions of pieces of content, petabytes worth of data, right? But even within 29,000 pieces of content, it's very difficult unless you've kind of done some level set and some understanding of what the things that matter to you as an organization are, to be able to surface those 29,000 pieces of content in the appropriate formulation that's relevant to the worker that's a front of house versus the worker that's a team lead versus the worker that's a manager versus a worker that's a, so on and so forth, right? I mean, it's that relevancy is going to be different all across the board, and having that personalized view or an algorithm that surfaces that information to you is really vital when we talk about that huge library of content.
So yeah, so take me back to like, 25 minutes ago, 20 minutes ago, because you mentioned one thing. It's Cynthia who's always available in the Slack channel. She's the subject matter expert that
Yeah.
everybody goes to. How, here it is. We're looking at 2023. We're staring down the barrel of 2023. In a matter of weeks. How important are these sages? These people who have this institutional knowledge. These individuals who can just sort of point you where you need to go and why things connect.
They're
Is that
super important. They're
Sorry,
super
go ahead.
important. And the unfortunate thing is, not to bring up the topic of generations in the workplace, but the folks are moving on, whether they're retiring or they're moving on to a different role, or they get elevated, or they get, what I mean. So those sages, as you put it, they're important. How do we bottle them? How do we turn them into institutional knowledge, right? How do we make them part of that algorithm? And I have to think that there's a huge opportunity from a product development perspective to create some of those types of things, right? Like the NPR. I'm a sometime NPR listener. A lot of times I listen to music when I'm driving to work, but I'll listen to NPR. And one of the segments that's ongoing that they have is they call it StoryCorps.
Oh yeah,
and
yeah.
I love it. Right? It's you and your grandma go to this, recording booth that might be taking place outside of a restaurant or a mall or a library or whatever else. And you tell about the grandma tells about her, story of growing up in the Depression and so on and so forth. Right. And then that becomes part of America's history, the institutional knowledge that is America, Americana, whatever. Well, what type of tools do you have in your organization that does that? Now, you could probably create your own StoryCorps booth, and all right, here's the employee institutional knowledge thing when you come on site and whatever. If you've been over 10, 15 years, you've got a story or two that's probably worth telling.
Mm-hmm.
You could record all that. You could instrument your company's Slack and Teams, and have Big Brother crawling all over it and say, like, these were valuable pieces of knowledge or something like that. I mean, maybe it's a combo of all these types of things, but that's where the really good learning stuff happens, is those interpersonal communications, and that mining the depths of the subject matter experts that are still out there, doing their thing. So I think that's a huge product. There's a product gap there.
I was just gonna say, like, you and I are both thinking the same thing. We're entrepreneurially, we're both thinking like, how do you create a service or a product out of this? My brain is reeling right now about what would that look like, other than just being extremely structured and disciplined about saying, look, all right, like, here's your monthly hour that we are requiring you to say, what'd you learn this month, document it, and make sure it gets in this place so that it's documented.
Yeah.
The reasons behind it. I just don't know. I have no extemporaneous.
Yeah, like, and maybe make it like thematic. Like, this month is like, what is a mistake that you made in the last several years or whatever that you never want to make again? You never want any other person in the company to ever have to make, right? Or what was the single biggest triumph that you felt you ever had working for our organization?
Talk to me about this. As someone who thinks about the future and someone who thinks about where things are going, stuff like that, because I love this question that you just put out there. It's like, okay, tell me about the biggest mistake you made. You were in a meeting, this was a sales call, and you blew it. You blew it because of X, Y, and Z. And yet somebody goes and reads that 2 years later, and like, yeah, I don't think so. I don't believe that. What do we do about that piece of, documented knowledge or data that we're given now, because we've had doubt introduced into almost everything these days? Is there an answer to this?
Trust signals, right? How do we give that? You need validators. Maybe you need, someone to forge that veracity, if you will, or enforce that veracity. I can't. That's a societal level problem.
Right. Yeah, I don't want. Yeah, I'm not putting you on the spot here, especially on the today of all days. But
it's crazy. I mean, yeah, what is real, what is valuable, and then furthermore, what is truthful, and Yeah,
Hmm.
that's heady.
Yeah, let's step away from that for 1 second. As someone who is an expert on mobile,
Yeah.
tell me about what mobile fails, or and what, what was working for the last 2 or 3, 4 years that maybe is going to be failing now, or, when you look 6, 12, 18 months out, is there anything new that's coming down there like this is going to be a big shift for us?
Yeah, I mean, segmentation of the information into these little tiny app black holes is definitely a problem, right? So like almost operating system level wide search into that application, it needs to happen. So this is like something that almost like has
Give
to
me a
happen.
specific example of that. Like, I'm not sure many people are going to get what you're saying.
Okay, so I'll give you a very specific example. I'm a season ticket holder for the local university, my alma mater. They're Bradley University. They're mid-level college, not that great, but I enjoy it.
Have fun.
Yeah, it's fun. It's good. It's a good opportunity. I've moved to electronic-based ticketing this year, like most of the people I think in their audience did. And the tickets are technically sold through Ticketmaster.com, but the tickets are not in the Ticketmaster app. I have to go to the specific app for the team in order to gain access to that particular ticket. I'm fumbling. I'm looking. I'm like, I got a bill for Ticketmaster. So I'm looking at Ticketmaster. I can't find the tickets. Right. How do I find where my tickets are? And it's inside of like a subscreen inside of this other app that I really only have ever used once or twice. Right. So how do I find that information? And then when you talk about maybe a company that has 3, 4, 5 different apps, they've got one for their timesheets, they've got one for their HR system for requesting time off, they've got one for their employee benefits plan, they got one. Like, how do I find the information that helps me be a better employee? And without knowing where to look, you don't know where to look, and you're not going to find the information, right? So having some level of operating system level wide search that can actually crawl into the app and surface the piece of information, I think is a key area of where mobile currently fails.
All right. So to take me to the forward looking, is there anything coming down the pipe or anything, exciting about the acceleration of mobile, the rise of remote work, et cetera, that you're particularly enamored by?
I mean, the design problems that were present 3, 4, 5, 7 years ago and more, where the company may have like a semi-broken responsive website that kind of works on your mobile device. Most all of that has been fixed at this point, but it's continuing to get better and better. And like widgetifying some of those pieces and components that are inside of your day-to-day so that they become surfaced even at the home screen level. They can be turned so it's not just a stock ticker that's on your dashboard or for your home screen or your weather or something like that, but it's like your employee communication platform can actually be inside your phone, and you can get bulletins, using but more effective use of push notifications, more effective use of collaboration opportunities, that might be arising basically in real time, and surfacing some of those, I think is kind of where we might be headed. Real time employee to employee communication at the surface level of the phone, right? So you don't have to go into the company's app. We've got it always available.
I like that. Any major challenges, roadblocks, or holy crap, we just need to get out of our own way kind of things that still haunt you, or that whenever you show up to either maybe an existing client or new clients, where it's that perennial problem that doesn't seem to go away?
I think the biggest problem, and I've done quite a bit of thinking about this, is this constant trail of data that we as users leave, and then our employers and our past employers custody and governance and respect for that data. How do they handle you as an ex-employee when you are no longer under their control, right? Like, what happens to my information? Some of it could be highly confidential and private, right? Like, I have track records and time of when I had to take personal time off, or when I had bereavement leave, or I had medical leave, or I have all kinds of other stuff that is potentially triangulatable PII that I leave in my employer's systems.
Mm-hmm.
And how does that get into life? Now, GDPR and a few other, legislative package. California's got some good privacy laws that are starting to come out, all that type of stuff. But it puts the employer in a tough position, because it's really difficult for them to kind of navigate what do I have to do? And then furthermore, it doesn't allow me as an employee to really sleep very well, knowing that, like, especially if you are a career hopper, if you're moving jobs every 2, 3, 4 years, which like a lot of people are doing, no criticism there, you have a significant data trail behind you.
I love this problem. I'm wondering, at what stage, as someone who's owned a company before, right, with lots of employees and whatnot, I can't think of a time where I ever thought, that's really interesting. Sarah just left us, and I wonder what kind of information we have about her. And, or even if it would be like, not obviously not in a nefarious way, but whatnot. I'm just wondering, does that just need to be packaged up and then guaranteed that it's burned somewhere? Like, are there, you have to hold on to certain data, I'm sure, for certain amounts of time just for regulatory requirements, or
and then you've got cloud vendors, right? You've got the cloud vendor that has all that information. So you've got all of that data is in some Workday database somewhere, or Paylocity, or whatever, Oracle talent management suites and stuff like that, right? You have, and in you as the customer, you have some level of hopefully assurance to the through the SLA and through the end user license agreement terms and conditions that they are going to destroy that data and stuff. But you don't necessarily know, especially when you've got companies that are there's merger and acquisition activity that takes place all the time, where a smaller company that was a good, trustworthy vendor gets rolled up into a much larger bolt-on play or something like that. Where did that data go? Where does Sarah's medical leave data go now that your HR system has been bought out 3 times and is now part of Workday? Are there fumes? There might still be fumes there.
There definitely are. I can 100%. What other? I got to ask you then. What other? I feel like this is the 4th book. Like, what that we're generating, or maybe you're already thinking about it. Like, what other dystopian future types of things do we need to consider? Data privacy is a big one. It's a huge one, because we all have. I think about it. I have literally been sending emails for 30 years now.
Mm-hmm.
The artifacts that are out there about me, I'm sure would get me fired from some organization.
There's mountains of it, right?
Yeah. And so, or at least denied from insurance claims. But are there any other things beyond data privacy that's is it how we're governing this, how we are collaborating in team, like anything else that you're like, we really need to think about this differently, or just think about it, period?
Well, there's facets of people, right? From a work-life balance perspective, maybe I'm just got like some sort of like pie in the sky view of it, but like you flash back to like a Dick Van Dyke era or whatever, when the breadwinner comes in the door, throws down their coat and their briefcase or whatever and stuff. It's like, unless their boss had a surprise dinner visit that was coming by, and you're like, oh shoot, Lucy, you got to make the dinner. Like it was very easy to compartmentalize, right? Your life as an employee and your life as a worker, never the two shall meet, right? But in reality, now I have a social media presence. You have a social media presence. They smush together, my work and my, it's a big deal, right? And so how is someone presenting themselves in the workplace, in the enterprise, in the business world, versus how are they on the weekend? What do they do? That is a problem, right? And I think that employers need to recognize that people have personalities, and they have hobbies, and they have lifestyles, and they have things that may be incongruous with their day-to-day.
Mm-hmm. Does that, so if I'm thinking, 3-5 years from now, is there what's the question I want to ask here? Is there a congruence that happens there, or a confluence that happens where you know, I'm thinking just sort of like, let's just, I'm the head chief of people, right? I'm just like, look, we're interviewing the whole person here.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily about, because there are, again, we go back to the regulatory body of the government says, hey, I can't ask you your age. I can't ask you, you know, some certain parts of you. And yet it's all exposed to us anyway. We know that it's a reality. Like you know, even if you don't want to, sometimes you stumble into this information.
Almost certainly.
So aren't we always interviewing the whole person in
Right.
terms of,
Well, yeah. And then you're looking at their LinkedIn profile, and they have expressed to you maybe what their desired salary is, and you can look at their past employment history. And while it's in Illinois, for example, it's illegal to ask you like how much was your past compensation history. You can't do that any longer. Thankfully, that's a good law. But you could potentially go, well, you were at Meta and you were a software engineer level 2.
Mhm.
And
we know what that band is. Yeah.
Yeah, we know what that band is because we've done competitive research. And so if you're trying to go for a software level engineer 3 or something now, we know how to compartmentalize you and we know what your expectations are, right? So there's some of that is just inescapable. You know, you're not going to get away from that. And that's just the way it is. And things got really squirrely here, I think, in the last couple of years, because as we've become increasingly remote or hybrid, and we can obviously work from anywhere, case in point, you know, whatever. Exactly.
Hey, man, if you could only see the closet I'm in right now.
I might get a job as a software engineer level 3 working at a company that's based out of a Mountain View or Menlo Park or wherever else. And I have an expectation that even if I'm in Omaha, Nebraska or Sioux Falls or Minneapolis or, you know, New Haven or
Mexico City, my friend, Mexico City,
you know, Costa Rica, wherever, like I have an expectation that I should be able to still be entitled to that software engineer level 3 salary, regardless of where I work. And the company's going, well, you know, standard of living there and cost of living is significantly less. So we're going to decrease. It's 18% less or 23% less in Omaha than it is in Denver. So we're going to pay you 23% less. And you go, but I'm doing the same work.
You say, yeah, but I offer the same value to the company.
I'm doing the exact same work, you know? And so that's also another conflict that we have to come to grasp with, which, you know, hopefully lifts some workers up and flattens the world even further. But at the same time, it presents challenges to the business, you know, for sure, from a recruiting standpoint, from an ongoing retaining talent and making sure that your employees are engaged and getting the satisfaction and the compensation and benefits that they want out of the roles that you're able to offer them.
Fantastic. I want to end this conversation by giving you a little bit of time to tell us about SparkLearn and what's the future hold. Like what's coming down the pipe in terms of what you're offering in terms of that platform, and you know, is there anything exciting that we should be expecting in 2023?
I appreciate that. So SparkLearn passed a major milestone when we went to DevLearn just a couple of weeks ago. We do offer the product available now online, directly purchasable via a credit card. So as far as a AI-driven learner experience platform that's got a really great mobile UI, I think we might just about be the only people out in the marketplace that you could go to the site, sign up, and start using it. And so one of the things that's really cool about SparkLearn is everything that takes place inside of the system is an XAPI event, like literally everything. Awesome. The tasks that the learners perform, but also the tasks that the content administrators perform, and also the tasks that the AI in the background performs. Everything in there is an XAPI event, and it comes bundled with an awesome Veracity instance of the Veracity LRS. So you don't have to make a whole other separate buying decision. You got an LXP and an LRS in one purchase, instantly usable with a mobile app component. So if you had never really tried kind of doing some XAPI stuff, this is probably about the easiest way to get into that. And we're going to continue to mine and plumb that. Like we've got over 100 plus XAPI events that take place inside of the system and are easily broadcastable. If you've got your own activity providers like courseware content from Articulate or Adobe Captivate or Lectora's, now the ELB Lectora publisher, everything that you created takes place inside of the system and broadcasts those XAPI events as well. And we're going to be continuing to add a number of different events, including learning journeys. So we'll be adding some skills and learning journeys, and that's going to have a healthy component of both AI driven as well as learner driven X API events too. So I'm a big data nerd in terms of what we've got going on. We've already touched on data and earlier in the podcast, but I'm really, really excited about some of the insights that are going to be able to be surfaced with some of our customers in our product. So
fantastic. Chad Udell, you're the Chief Strategy Officer for Float and SparkLearn. I can't thank you enough for taking time out of what I'm sure is an incredibly busy day in Illinois there to talk with us about literally everything from the dystopian future of humanity to what's next with SparkLearn and everything in between. Everybody should go check out the 3 books you've written now and the next one you're going to be writing soon, I'm sure. But thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ladek. Appreciate it.
Thank you again for listening to the eLearn podcast. I just wanted to take one last moment here to ask you to, if you enjoyed this episode, if you learned something, if you had fun, if you liked the guest, if you wanted to learn more, if you feel like sharing this with somebody, do me a favor. Hit subscribe on your podcast player right now. Just do it right now before the episode ends. Hit subscribe, and that way you'll never miss an episode as we publish them every week. Thanks.